Because though that biblical duty has fallen on hard times amongst most modern Christians, well, the historical Christian church used to always consider daily family worship to be what it is: a biblical duty and a vital family necessity. They knew what many today have forgotten or never learned in the first place, perhaps. Namely, genuine, heartfelt, daily family worship has the incredible capacity to set our families onto the right track and keep them there. And they knew that in turn would make for stronger churches and a stronger nation. Let me tell you something. The historical record bears me out on this point. Because when you study church history, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Whenever the nation and church were flourishing throughout history, so was family worship. Well, I don't have time to lay out anything close to a full account on this point. Let me just give you at least a taste of what I'm talking about. Let me give you a little excerpt from the way things used to be.
In 1679, the Synod of New England gathered at Boston in response to a request by the General Court of the Massachusetts Colony to supply an answer to the following question: what are the evils that have provoked the Lord to bring judgments upon New England?
So to set the stage a little bit, a group of political and religious leaders convened in Boston in 1679. And their purpose for convening was to try and get to the root of the problems that were beginning to plague their newly burgeoning nation. I want you to note the reason that they gave for the cause of their problems. Quote,
"These representative church leaders responded with 14 reasons, the sixth of which reads, 'There are many families that do not pray to God constantly, morning and evening, and many more where the Scriptures are not daily read, so that the word of Christ might dwell richly in them. There are too many houses that are full of ignorance and profaneness, and that are not duly examined, and for this cause wrath may come upon others round about them, as well as upon themselves. Many householders who profess religion do not cause all that are within their gates to become subject unto good order as they ought.'"
And then the council said this:
"Most of the evils that abound among us proceed from defects in family government."
Most of the evils that abound among us proceed from defects in family government. Wow, now that's a powerful statement. Let me repeat that. Most of the evils that abound among us, they said, proceed from defects in family government. That's a lesson that we as 21st century Christians need to learn from. And similarly, a century later, in 1766, the great American Baptist leader Isaac Backus wrote these words for his generation. He said,
"New England has formerly been a place famous for religion in general and for family worship in particular. But of late, the neglect of this, as well as other religious duties, has evidently been growing upon us, which has caused much grief to pious souls. But I have not heard that any discourse has been published upon this subject here these many years, as there have lately been numbers remarkably awakened in some parts of the land who were trained up in the neglect of family prayer, and who are still at a loss about the scriptural authority for the daily practice thereof."
Which of course is not uncommon today. Unfortunately, there are tens of thousands of otherwise sincere Christians today who also have been trained up in the neglect of family worship. Their families and churches never practiced nor taught family worship to them. And so consequently, they too are at a loss about the fact that Scripture even so much as requires it, simply because they grew up in churches or homes that themselves neglected it. And what about the Reformers? Where did they stand on family worship? Well, as the 19th century scholar and pastor James Alexander wrote,
"When we come down to the great revival of evangelical holiness that took place during the Reformation, we find ourselves in the midst of such a stream of authority and example of godly people who participated in family worship that we must content ourselves, for the sake of time, with only general statements. Whatever may have been the practice of later generations, the early Reformers were universally known for having placed the highest value on family devotions."
And though we don't have the luxury of time to review all of the particulars, here's what I would want you to note about the Reformers. To the Reformers, family worship was no mere extra, no mere add-on. No, men like Calvin and Knox and Zwingli all considered family worship to be not only a biblical duty, but a natural outgrowth of a family whose hearts were right with God. In other words, they saw family worship for what it is, an almost automatic outward expression of the inward love and reverence that all true Christian families had. Now, to them, family worship was as natural to the redeemed newborn heart as breathing is to the newborn baby. To them, it was something that flowed naturally from hearts that were truly in love with God. And as Alexander continued,
the family prayers of Luther in his house are recorded with warmth by his contemporaries and biographers. The churches of Germany in a better day were blessed with a widespread adherence to family worship. Similar facts are recorded of Switzerland, France, and Holland. But in no country has the light of the dwelling burned more brightly than in Scotland. Family worship in all its fullness was synonymous in Scotland with the First Reformation. Probably no land, in proportion to the number of its people, ever had so many praying families as those in the Church of Scotland.
And of course, God used that tiny country of Scotland in powerful ways during the Reformation. So, really, that's the reason for this study. A, family worship was an integral part of virtually every generation of Christians who had a great positive impact upon the advancing of God's kingdom. B, we in the United States are a dangerously backsliding nation, and therefore C, a return to the old paths would do wonders in helping us as a nation and as a church and as individual families to find rest for our souls, as Jeremiah chapter 6 puts it.